References. They're the lifeblood of sitcoms, the soul of research, and the part of your resume that you should really focus on developing. For real, you can't leave your high school bio teacher on there forever. In Dota, they're an essential part of the world itself, with items, spells, and even heroes being based on other characters and series. Did you know? Here are some references in Dota. Let's start off with references to Magic the Gathering, the first ever and probably last collectible card game. Invented in 1993 by Richard Garfield, the game is massively popular, and given that it's on the nerdier side and has a Tolkien-inspired fantasy setting, it's no surprise that there will be some overlap with Warcraft fans. With that said, several cards were referenced in Defense of the Ancients. For instance, Morphling, the Morphling, was inspired by Morphling. The blue creature card depicts a steampunk warrior staring at a perfect reflection of themselves, which the hero uses as a basis of their character. Morphling uses the water elemental model, reflecting the card's mana color with his model, and the artwork with his ultimate ability at the time, Undercover. Two of the card's effects allow it to gain 1 power at the cost of 1 toughness, and vice versa. This was adapted into a signature ability, Morph, which allows him to shift agility into strength, or strength into agility. Similarly, this either increases damage at the cost of health, or the other way around. There's also an ability on the card that prevents Morphling from being the target of spells or abilities. This effect was translated into one of Morphling's first skills, Force of Will, which would block a spell periodically. The ability also takes its name from another blue card that counters spells. Morphling was such a love letter to MTG that I'm hoping we can someday see him evolve into Greater Morphling, with all these fun upgrades attached to it. Next up is Leshrac. This one is interesting because Leshrac the Walker of Night isn't actually depicted in the card game. Instead, he's referenced by a series of cards in name and flavor text that demonstrate the extent of his power and control. He's got followers, he's got minions, and he loves to mess with your head. He's depicted in a 2-part comic series called Chandalar, which portrays him as an older-looking wizard with orbs of fire floating around his cranium. As you can tell, the connection between the card and the hero are in name only. But while we're on the subject, Leshrac is an anagram of the name Charles, which is the middle name of Chris Page, one of Magic's early playtesters. So through a complicated series of information, Leshrac is the byproduct of a fun inside joke. Leshrac's spell, Diabolic Edict, is actually based on a card of the same name, where the effect reads that a target player sacrifices a creature. The spells are pretty analogous in the sense that the less targets there are around, the more effective they become. In the card's case, if the enemy only has 1 creature out, that's a guaranteed removal. The same goes for the hero, who generally likes to cast a spell around 1 target, ensuring that they take the full brunt of the damage. Moving on, the techies are named Squee, Spleen, and Spoon. Spoon, as we already know from the History of Techies video, was named in a poll on the old DotaAllStars.com forums, in a post by Yertle the Turtle. Squee was named after the card, Squee, Goblin Nabob, while Spleen was very likely a reference to the flavor text of Goblin Soothsayer, which states, "I see a great victory and rivers of blood," and looks like a spleen. The Goblin Kaboomus card also shares similarities with the techies. The creature's effect allows you to create landmines on the battlefield that deal damage to a target of your choice without flying, which is like the landmine skill, and then there's a chance that he can blow himself up, much like Suicide Squad Attack or Blast Off. The creature, Grim the Corpseborn, looks like an homage to Pudge, and its effect reinforces this fact. It basically gains a 1/1 counter anytime a creature around it dies, a mechanic similar to Flesh Heap. Given that Goblin Kaboomus was released in 2015, and Grimgrin came in 2011, there's a good chance that some members of the R&D team were likely fans of Dota, and wanted to pay tribute in card form. This fact was solidified in a blog post on February 2nd, 2009 by Mark Rosewater, the head designer of Magic. He explains the backstory of Progenitus, explaining that it started out as Anti-Mage. He was a 4/4 creature with flying that cost 1 of each mana. When Anti-Mage attacks, the defending player draws all mana from the lands they control, and the card deals damage equal to the mana pool. After this, the mana pool is emptied. This is a pretty clear reference to Anti-Mage's ultimate, Mana Void. The post goes on to say that R&D went through a lot more tweaks until we eventually ended up with Progenitus, which you can probably tell doesn't resemble Anti-Mage at all. However, the post does mention that the rough draft of the card was based on the character from Dota, and that it was a popular game in R&D. Although there hasn't been a direct collaboration between Dota 2 and MTG just yet, there have been crossovers in both Puzzle and Dragons, and Gaia Online of all things, so it's just a matter of time before the Planeswalkers make their way into the game. Final Fantasy is one of the most recognized and beloved JRPGs of all time, and not even Dota could escape from its turn-based grasp. In the original Dota, Phantom Lancer was Kimari Ronzo of Final Fantasy X. He's not based on him gameplay-wise, but Azwraith uses the likeness of Kimari as his model and icon. From the looks of it, this is a modified version of Grom Hellscream, whose possessed model is used by Axe. A deeper reference can be found in the name of Phantom Lancer's first skill, Spirit Lance, which happens to be the name of Kimahri's celestial weapon in Final Fantasy X. This weapon provided evade and counter, which is sorta the effect of Doppelwalk. Ha! I don't know, I'm reaching here. All we need now is for the next couple of heroes to use Biran and Yankei as a base, so we can all make fun of Phantom Lancer for being a small Ronzo and having a broken horn. Kimahri was a blue mage character, a class that focused on learning spells from enemy monsters. While PL didn't embody this archetype, Lucifer the Doombringer would end up filling those shoes. Although Devour was taken from the Kodo Beast unit, it closely matched the spirit of the blue mage, as it allowed Lucy to eat jungle creeps to gain their ability. His old spell, Level Death, was named after a spell of the same name in Final Fantasy VIII. Its effects more closely resembled Level 5 Death, which would instantly kill all enemies if their level was a multiple of 5. Likewise, Doombringer's Level Death would deal a flat amount of damage to an enemy unit, but depending on the level of the skill, it would deal bonus damage if the target's level was a multiple of a certain number. For instance, Level 1 of this ability would deal the bonus to enemies level 6, 12, 18, 24, and in later patches, 25. It's such a unique homage that I wish it would have stayed in the game, but admittedly it is unnecessarily complicated. Lucy's ultimate, Doom, also shares its name with a Final Fantasy spell. However, this spell in most cases instantly KOs an enemy at a low success rate, and it's usually a black magic spell. In earlier versions of Dota, Doom would pretty much wipe you from existence, with its 18-second duration and 120 damage per second at max level. Nowadays, it's more like you're slightly annoyed for an okay amount of time, so maybe they can just rename it to Stub Toe or 3 people walking slowly in front of you. Juggernaut has a pretty direct reference in his ultimate ability, Omnislash. This is taken from Final Fantasy VII's Cloud Strife, whose level 4 limit break is the namesake of the spell. This ability hits random enemies 15 times and automatically crits each target, and it looks radical. Although this is the only thing that Juggernaut has in common with Cloud, the unofficial Fun Mode mod features Cloud as a playable hero. Of course, he's wearing the Kingdom Hearts scarf because it looks dope. In this, Cloud has a jump skill called Braver, a nuke called Blade Beam, and a passive that brings down meteors called Meteor Rain. These are all named after Cloud's other limit breaks, and his Omnislash is a more faithful version of the spell, hitting 15 enemies and critting for 3 times his attack damage per hit. A more minor reference comes in Shiva's Guard, which is likely named after the summon in the series. Although Shiva is the name of an existing god, the fact that the item has an icy theme bridges the connection to the Final Fantasy character. In a collaboration made in heaven, purchasing Final Fantasy Type 0 on Steam will grant you both a Master Chocobo Courier and a Class 0 Moogle Ward. With these 2 items, and all those replica swords you bought from anime conventions, you are that much closer to living out those JRPG protagonist fantasies. Those 2 series had quite the impact on the game. However, there's also a lot of one-off references that can be lumped into a massive pile. Illyria, Anubarak, Furion, Kel'Thuzad, Rexxar, and Vol'jin are all named after existing characters in Warcraft, while some of their lore is based directly on their counterparts. Pudge the Butcher and Leoric the Skeleton King are both based on bosses from Diablo. Meepo the Geomancer is a reference to a Dungeons & Dragons character named Meepo, Keeper of Dragons. He appeared in an adventure module called the Sunless Citadel, where the adventurers are tasked with finding and returning his pet dragon. In Dota All-Stars, Meepo's original model was a kobold, so the reference is very straightforward, but the connections stop there. While we're on the topic of D&D, Vengeful Spirit spell, Magic Missile, is also taken from the tabletop game. They're both very simple spells, although Venge has the added benefit of stunning her target, making hers objectively better than the original spell. The Nerubian Weaver could be a reference to Perdido Street Station, a fantasy novel that includes a race of gigantic spiders called Weavers. They exist in multiple dimensions at once, and can see, traverse, and manipulate the fabric of space-time. The skills of Atropos the Bane Elemental are a reference to Tactics Ogre the Knight of Lotus, also known as the spin-off to the actual greatest game of all time. The skills Enfeeble, Brain Sap, Nightmare, and Fiend's Grip were lifted directly from a list of spells in the game under the Bane element. If you play Bane as a support, you also get to live a cursed existence, as your carries can't stop themselves from attacking nightmared enemies. Lina Inverse includes 2 illusions for the price of 1. When the hero was first implemented, it used the Blood Mage model and went by the name Link Inverse. As we all know, any elf named Link is by default an homage to Link of the Legend of Zelda series. When the hero started going by Lena Inverse, this made her a straight up reference to the protagonist of the anime, Slayers. They both share the name and fire powers, with the hero's abilities having direct parallels to its source material. Dragon Slave keeps its name, while Light Strike Array was based on a spell called Explosion Array. Laguna Blade was an interesting case because the spell translates into English as Ragna Blade, meaning that there's an actual real-life weeaboo pronunciation in Dota 2. Speaking of Dota 2, the voice responses of the characters alone are filled with references to movies, novels, music, mythology, you name it, really. There's enough content to have a video dedicated to that topic alone, but for the sake of time, I'll only focus on the nods to other Valve titles. The most blatant one is Io's Arcana, the benevolent companion, which dresses him up as a companion cube from Portal. He even goes as far as having responses that play out Still Alive, the iconic ending song from the first game. Accompanying him is the Portal Pack, which includes the voice of GLaDOS as an announcer, and a ward themed after the game. Moving on to the Half-Life series, the Combine logo appears on all item recipes. Of course, the pun here is that the recipes are used to combine the items together. The courier known as Alfred of Lacassida may also be a reference to the antlions, both being green, insect-like creatures with tiny little hands. Boosh the Tinker seems to be the Keenfolk version of Dr. Isaac Kleiner. They share a very similar backstory, where Tinker's lore tells a reimagined version of the Black Mesa incident, although here it's called the Violet Plateau incident, but the whole exploding underground lab and ushering monsters in through a portal thing remain the same. Unsurprisingly, they share the same voice actor in Harry Robbins, who does a more cartoonish version of the Dr. Kleiner character, and even refers to the pet headcrab, Lamar.
And I've clamped the manifold parameters to CY base and LG orbifold, Hilbert inclusive.
Lamar! Lamar!
I've clamped the manifold parameters to CY base and LG orbifold, Hilbert inclusive. Lamar?
Undying also mentions the parasite when he kills Tinker.
For Lamar.
While he's here, the Dirge's references revolve around the Left 4 Dead series, calling out certain heroes by the name of the special infected that they resemble.
Hunter, Jockey, Spitter, Charger.
While meeting with certain airborne heroes, Undying will say
Dead Air,
which is a campaign available in both Left 4 Dead games. There's also an unused voice line where he says,
No dead are safe from Blueheart Bob,
which seems nothing more than a fun parody of the famous wall writing, No zombie is safe from Chicago Ted. For Counter-Strike, this is covered by the Techies, who have responses which allude to the announcer from CS.
Counter-terrorists win. Bomb has been planted. Bomb has been defused.
Counter-techies win. Bomb has been planted. Bomb has been defused.
Darn!
Like a good host, I've saved the best for last. Team Fortress 2. Most of the references to TF2 are found between the characters' voice lines. Sniper and Techies share some lines with the Australian Sniper and Demo Man because of their similar archetypes.
Thanks for standing still, wanker.
Thanks for standing still, wanker. They're gonna have to glue you back together.
In hell?
Oh, they're going to have to glue you back together in hell.
Lich and Meepo share some with the Heavy and Scout because of their voice acting. Matter of fact, Lich and Heavy have the same voice actor, Gary Schwartz, which would be the only possible explanation why a decrepit ice mage would ever be related to a Russian bear.
Num num. Nom 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 nom.
This is a real frickin' embarrassment.
This is a real frickin' embarrassment.
Although I'm not too convinced on this next one, it doesn't hurt to put it out there. When you destroy a set of Radiant barracks, the debris it leaves behind has a pretty close design to the teleporter from TF2. It is fairly surface level, but the creeps do teleport into the map at this spot, so maybe the connection does hold some water. I don't know. Tell me what you think. In terms of items, Ol Snaggletooth has a hat for Witch Doctor that looks like a crocodile's head. This item also appears with the same name in TF2 as a cosmetic item for the Sniper. I can't help but bring up that these two totally stole the look from Big Boss. He was rocking this headgear back in the 60s and by God he knew he looked good doing it. A trio of items also appeared in Team Fortress that belong to some Dota boys. These are the Storm Spirit's Jolly Hat, Clockwork's Helm, and Sniper Sniping Glass. By today's standards, these don't stand out too much, but it's always fun to have cosplay items available to blow your money on. This last mention is kind of a stretch, but the Demo Man has an item set called the Forgotten King, which looks like an undead monarch. Skeleton King you could say. Given that this set came out a year after Skeleton King turned into Wraith King, and it's titled, you know, the Forgotten King, I would say that this is a reference to Asterion's old model. However, I do want to point out that the title of the set is misleading. Skeleton King is only gone, not forgotten. It's fun to look back and think of how many different pieces of media shaped the game as we know it today. With every new item, cosmetic set, and hero that enters the fray, you can be sure that the writers at Valve are foaming at the mouth to throw in a reference or two. In the meantime, let's all hold our hands and pray that we can have zany garbage like a Neon Cat Courier or a Samuel L. Jackson announcer pack. I'm Dennis the Tall, and those were some references in Dota. Ahem! Before you go, follow me on Twitter, take a gander at my Patreon, watch all of these doodads, and if you're going to reference something, be sure to note it in your Works Cited page, otherwise you'll get an automatic fail for plagiarism. See you soon!